everybody. Welcome to HITRUST Secrets, where we talk about all things high trust, compliance, assurance, governance, risk, whatever is on people's minds. So I'm Sue Richards, joined with Donna Nodson, Stephen Dufour, and Jeff McHugh. Before we get started, I just wanted everybody to know if you're subscribed to our newsletter for the HITRUST users group for HITRUST Secrets, you just got an email with the link to the survey. We're trying to get some questions in for Gregory Webb, the CEO of HITRUST, who's coming on in 2 weeks, which I realize is probably our last
Hmm.
session for 2025 because we've got Christmas and New Year's right after that. So wrapping up the year with a bang, which is nice, always nice. But I mean, we can always ask him questions live, but if there's things we can kind of categorize and make sure we're getting the questions that are top of mind for most people. So please fill out the
Sure.
survey if
Yeah.
possible. And I'll also, in the recording of this, I'll also put that in the description, the link to the survey. So I'm excited for that. All right. Does anybody have any questions or anything that we're wanting to lead with? Okay. I actually do. I went through, I submitted, I had a high trust, a client that was submitting to high trust as of December 1. And so, of course, we're trying to finish everything up the week of Thanksgiving. And it was a little crazy. And it's been, it's one of those things that, and let me share my screen, because it's one of those things when you go through the high trust handbook, it talks about, oh, here's, where is it? So here's the assessment handbook. High trust will go through, if I can find it. Oh, I'm not sharing it. Okay, there we go. High trust will go through let's see, read the handbook. Come on. So you've got the pre-assessment requirement statements, but when you are getting to the submission process, well, actually, let me go back up here to the whole workflow. So, High Trust is always touting this, and for the most part, we live in this performing validation. I mean, that's months and months and months of work encapsulated in there. And then it's like, oh, hey, and then you're just going to input caps and sign, and then you're going to review the caps, and then you're going to perform check-in. But there's certain things that you really need to be aware of that could potentially get in your way. Because again, this is from the High Trust my CSF. So here's all the things that you're doing during pre-performing validation. And for the most part, you're validating the scores, you're doing all this. Your external assessor is going through, when you're getting closer and closer to the validating of the scores, you've already booked your reservation, but you've always got these complete representation letter and complete validated report agreement. And so you're like, okay, well, once I get through those, once the assessor has signed off and said, yeah, everything's good, all I have to do is fill out these two little forms and I'm good. Well, filling out those two little forms can be a little bit crazy making, especially because that's usually senior leadership that needs to sign those forms. So here we are, the week of Thanksgiving, going, okay, who wants to sign the form? And in addition to that, the representation letter is included in your high trust validated assessment report. And so there's a place for a logo because they want you to have your company letterhead and be able to show that. Well, typically, IT people don't have the right logo in the right format with the right parameters and pixels, and it's maybe a PNG and it needs to be a JPEG or
Mhm.
an EPS or whatever. And so you also have your marketing department or your human resources department or somebody that's going to need that as well. So here you are thinking, oh, okay, I just have to get to the finish line of having the assessor review all of my evidence, but yet you still do have these as well. And then you're like, okay, once I'm done this, because it says the whole time you're staring at this for months and months, performing validation. So these are required prior to submission. Well, these are also required prior to submission. The external assessor needs to review and acknowledge the assessment results. And that's a new link in my CSF where it'll basically kind of tell you, hey, I think you're on track for certification, and here are the corrective actions or the gaps that we found in here. So your assessor has to say, okay, yep, I agree with that. Then you still have to input your caps. Um,
Hmm.
and so all of this is going on, after you've got the representation letter, you've gone through all of these different steps, but you still haven't submitted yet. So if you're, like we were, December 1 is our deadline, we're trying to get it done a couple of days ahead of schedule, but there were all these extra pieces, and luckily we didn't have a lot of corrective action plans. But if you were facing, 30, 40 corrective action plans, you've got to get all those in there. You've got to describe what your corrective actions are going to be, your deadlines, who's going to own all that. And so it can
Hmm.
take more than a day to
Hmm.
get all that
And you
done.
and you have to link the statements.
Right, you have to link all the statements. So, like I said, luckily we only had three, so it wasn't a huge amount but again, I think in my head I was always thinking, well, phase three, once I hit all those check boxes, I'm good and it's submitted. And that was the deadline I was always heading for. But again, this is something that you definitely have to be aware of. But you can see that completing the representation letter can also happen here. So you can continue on inputting your caps and everything while you're waiting for that piece. So you can move to the next phase, once your external assessor has validated the scores, because everything that's required in this phase three, once all
Hmm.
those that are required are done, you can move on to phase four, because it'll still kind of bring those along to say, hey, it's required prior to submission, but not in this phase. So be aware of those and kind of make sure you understand that, submitting to high trust isn't just all your evidence has been reviewed and your assessor agrees with you. There's three or four more steps in there, and you may
Hmm.
need other departments, other teams, to do that. So it
Yep.
was,
Um, oh, sorry. So I
no,
was
that's
just
okay. It
gonna,
just, yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It just felt like we were getting down to the wire, and I'm like, okay, how many
Yeah.
more phases are we?
Yeah. I was just going to add in that in addition to the High Trust Handbook link, there is a separate MyCSF user guide, and there is a section in there. I don't see one on the validated report agreement, but I do see one on the management representation letter. So I've
Okay.
posted that in the chat window there,
Oh, perfect.
so folks can see the link, because I came across this recently. I can't remember if we've covered this in this session before, but I have not, I don't know how long the user guide has been out there, for my CSF, but it definitely wasn't something that I've known about for very long. So I
Hmm.
wanted to highlight that for folks because I often get very frustrated that the handbook doesn't cover more of, yes, but where do I put this in the system? And how does how
Right.
do I connect this in my CSF to do all the right things? So that's actually a separate user guide altogether.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely we'll include that in our chat and our links as
Mhm.
well. So yeah, and again, yeah, that handbook can be so detailed that it's almost overwhelming,
Yeah.
with an amount of information. And sometimes, yeah, you are just kind of looking, look, just give me the high level overview of
Hmm.
it. So
Yeah.
definitely helpful. So that was my scary story. I felt like I was like, okay, well, at least we got through phase three pretty quickly, and I wasn't waiting until, oh, we've got time until 4 o'clock on the last day. Well, as long as we get through those, because we would have had a couple more hurdles to go through. So luckily, it wasn't arduous or anything, but
So
it
when
definitely.
you think you're done, you're not necessarily done.
Exactly. Because, like I said, I mean, you're spending so much time here in this phase that you kind of skip through in your mind these two phases that have to happen. This, right here with that check in is the submission to high trust. So you've still got two things to kind of go through before it's considered submitted to high trust. So don't think that, once I'm done with phase three and all those little buttons are checked off, we're good, because there's still a couple more
Hmm.
phases to walk through. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not hard,
It's
they're not arduous unless you've got a lot of corrective actions.
Yeah.
good safety.
Exactly. Exactly. Just beware. And, I mean, and I think that's why it's so important to have somebody along who's a project manager who has kind of that mindset, because we typically are ingrained to do things ahead of time. We're
Yeah.
we're typically like, okay, here's your deadline, but I know the real deadline is 2 weeks out.
Hmm.
But you also don't want to kind of, get into that. Well, yeah, okay, that slipped a little bit. So, just make sure you're building some time in for those two pieces. And the cool thing about waiting on that representation letter till you get through to phase 4 is that the date on that letter of that representation letter is the date of your high trust certification. So if we were to have had somebody do that representation letter in the middle of November, whatever would be our date as opposed to December 1 being our
Hmm.
date. So you want to make sure, that you don't go too early, but it's also not something required for that phase 3. It can happen as long as you do it before phase 7, I think it is.
Yeah. And now the date is impactful if you're submitting on a main assessment, but not on an
Correct.
interim or a rapid
Correct.
recert. So an interim or a rapid recert, you can do the letter early. The date doesn't have an impact on your date of certification, because that stays with the main certification
Right.
year. But it absolutely, if you're on the main certification, watch the deadlines, because and I will continue beating this drum, because if you're submitting a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks early, every day costs you money.
Hmm.
Make sure you're getting the full value of high trust. And if make sure you understand what's left. I always submit 24, 48 hours in advance. That makes me comfortable. I don't like to, wait until the very last day, but I also don't like to submit a week or two in advance, because if you break down the cost of high trust, not only the cost to high trust, but your external assessors, any consultants you engage, your internal team members, the amount of time they spend, all of that each day costs money. So you want to
Exactly.
make sure you're getting the full value and you're not cutting into your time. And then, this year it'll be 2 weeks early. The next year it'll be another 2 weeks early. All of a sudden you've lost a month of certification, that you didn't need to lose.
Exactly. Well, and what you can do is you can build into your schedule those last 2 weeks to
Hmm.
be your cap input.
Hmm.
So you tell your assessor, if we're gonna try to submit by December 1st, you tell your assessor, hey, by November 15th, I want
Hmm.
all of this evidence reviewed. So we're out of phase 3, and then we're into phases 4 and 5, where we're looking at what our corrective actions plans are. We're getting all those together because then, to your point, you can then say, okay, now I can have the management representation letter done. I don't think you can push it in advance. I don't think you can say, oh, today's December 1 and I can say my representation letter date is December 15th. I don't think you can push it into
Yeah.
the future. So, but you definitely want to
But you
make
can you
sure,
can socialize it to leadership as a Word document and say,
right,
hey, this is what you're going to sign. Review
right.
it
And you're going
now.
to get an email, but make sure you're not
Don't
on a
send
ski
it through
slope
legal when
somewhere.
I send it to you through
Right,
high trust.
right. But please don't be on a ski slope somewhere and if you are, that's cool. Let's figure out who else can sign it that will be in during that particular time.
Right.
And make
Absolutely.
sure your marketing team knows that you need a logo. It's like size 55 by 50 or 500. It's just
Yeah, the
it's
system's
an odd, weird
very,
logo.
very fidgety on that.
Yes.
Couple of other things. If you have a large number of caps, just a reminder that if any of those are related to the same project, you can enter that project one time. And as long as you're clear about all the changes that are taking place so that it covers each of the control requirements, you can link multiple controls to one cap.
Correct.
Think about your naming conventions on the cap. Don't name it after a control if it's covering multiple controls. But you can absolutely link multiple controls to one cap. And if you have 20 or 30 or 40 caps, this is a really important thing to consider, because it's going to be a lot less chaos for your team, especially if it is genuinely tied to the same project. It'll be a lot less chaos for your team. It'll be a much more streamlined documentation, and you'll know that those 30 different controls with caps are actually related to about 6 or 8 projects, right? And so you just want to then put in those 6 or 8
Hmm.
caps and link accordingly. It'll
Exactly.
save you a whole bunch of hassle.
Yeah. Well, and you also, there's the ability in there also to accept the risk. So if
Mhm.
you as a business decide, you know what, maybe we didn't document this properly, you know, that we're excluding this or whatever. And so, you know, you missed as far as, you know, you didn't provide the evidence, but you've decided that, you know, really as an organization, we're going to not move forward with a specific control in the prescriptive way High Trust has it, but you can
Mhm.
describe your compensating controls. For example, there's one control that talks about, you know, time boxing when people can connect. Well, that is great for a typical 9 to 5 office, but it's not going to work when you're a hospital
Mhm.
because, you know, you can't say, well, yeah, you know, I'm going to be not letting people on Sunday night at 3 a.m. Well, that's not going to work because they're going to be needing your system. So you can, but you may not have put that clearly in your documentation that says, you
Mhm.
know, yeah, our time boxes are not going to follow. You know, you may have just read the wording that High Trust had and said, oh yeah, you know, we're going to time box based on, you know, business operations. And then you're going to be like, okay, they're 24/7. So your corrective action may be, I'm going to recognize that we're 24/7. We're not going to be able to time control this. However, we're going to use multi-factor authentication and we're going to have the audit logging and we're going to have notifications of
Mhm.
odd behavior, or we're going to be able to geographically lock it down. We just can't time based lock it down. So there's ways that you can do it, but you can go, you know what, we're going to accept the risk because we're not going to implement this control in this prescriptive manner.
Yeah, I always think the time boxing is a bit funny, especially for the American workplace, because between the different time zones we cover and the flexible working approach or hardcore working approach, depending on your perspective, how much work gets done between 9 and 5, and how much work gets done between 5 and 9.
Right.
That's, and I,
Exactly.
I don't mean 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. I mean more like 5 p.m. and 9 a.m.
Exactly. Yeah. But
So,
I mean, at some point, you know, there is the whole insider threat where people look at that and say, you know what, especially like a financial business or something like that, or
mhm,
like, hey, if the banks aren't open, we can't be doing whatever it is. So for these
yeah.
systems, you know, we can lock that down. But yeah, I agree. You know, it does seem like a kind of a one that may fall off at some point where it will be time and or geography based,
Mhm.
or to your point, you know, remote users. So we're not going to even, you know, limit it by geography.
Well, and this is where AI could be helpful because if AI were able to identify trends and say, yes, Donna typically works, bigger range of hours, but she's never online at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Hmm.
So if they then identify a pattern deviation for a designated
Correct.
user, and that's where AI and bigger volumes with very customized pattern identification could be incredibly useful because it could then flag up to my IT department that my credentials were used at an odd hour for me.
Correct.
Doesn't matter, maybe Susan works at 3 o'clock in the morning and she's happy to do that.
Right.
Maybe not happy, but
Right.
maybe that's a normal circumstance for a different user and it wouldn't flag it up, but it does for me. So those are the types of things that could be very useful. On that same wavelength, if an organization does something that, and this speaks to what you were talking about, Susan, in terms of accepting the risk or attesting that your organization does something different that might not be documentable. And this is very extremely relevant for small organizations, which is an attestation from somebody on the senior leadership team that says, this is how we do it. This is what was done. This, project had to look like this because of these certain parameters, and this is how we covered it. It's not always going to be, sufficient, but it's worth a conversation with your assessor because
Hmm.
sometimes in rare circumstances, and I say rare because if you have an entire collection of evidence that is all attestations, there are going to be red flags going up all over the place at
Right.
High Trust, and they're going to be looking at everything.
Right. They'll be
But
like, well,
if
you don't
it's
conform to any of it. So,
right, right. But if it's a rare circumstance that is justifiable and you have somebody
mhm.
on senior leadership who's going, this is genuinely what happened in our organization, that might be worth a conversation with your assessor to see if an attestation is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of times you can do that as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that for this particular one, um, because the policy said they were doing it this way, and then they were like, well, we're not. So it was like, all right, well, there's a gap, and then it was like, well, we're never going to do it that way. Okay, well, that's okay. We just need to make sure the
Probably not
policy
the right
shows.
policy.
Right. We need to make sure the policy shows how you are going to do it, the business
Yeah.
justification, the fact that you've set it up to senior leadership to say, this is what we're going to do instead. And
Yeah.
to your point, like there are systems that will alert if they won't necessarily stop somebody from doing something unless you configure it that way, but they will alert to say, hey, Donna's on at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's just watch what she's getting, out of. If she's just getting
Yeah.
the email, we're cool. But if she starts looking at some system and starts exfil a lot of data, yeah, we're
Yeah.
going to put a stop to that. We're going to alert somebody. And so, yeah, there are ways to kind of do that outside of
Mm-hmm.
a specific, well, yeah, nobody works in this company after 5 p.m., which,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that maybe 20 years ago. You could maybe argue there were some. I know I used to work at a company. It was nice because I'd been at a consulting company before that was like, they were calling you on vacation. I mean, I give them my 2 weeks notice and they still were calling me, can you get on this call at 11 o'clock at night? And I was like, okay, this is why I'm leaving. But I went to another company that was basically, there were no laptops. There were no Blackberries. Everybody just had a desktop computer and you turned off your computer at 5 o'clock at night and you left and went home. And my boss at the time had said, because he had come from a consulting company too, and he was like, it's going to take you a couple months to like ratchet down.
Mm-hmm.
He's like,
Yeah.
it's a different pace, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it can definitely be like that. All
That
right. Well,
sounds good.
thanks everybody
Thanks,
and have
Jen.
a great
Thanks,
rest of the
Steve.
week.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next High Trust Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your high trust journey.